The Battle of Antietam by Alexander Gardner. In September of 1862, something happened that had never happened before in American history. For the first time, ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, factory workers, mothers, and fathers could walk into a gallery in New York City and come face to face with the dead. Not paintings of the dead, not romanticized illustrations, the actual dead. The photographer was Alexander Gardner. The place was Antietam Creek, Maryland, and nothing about how Americans understood war would ever be quite the same again. The image we're looking at is one of the most quietly devastating photographs ever made. At first glance, it reads almost like a landscape. A long, sunken road, what soldiers would come to call the Sunken Road or Bloody Lane, cuts diagonally through the frame. The earth on either side is pale and churned, stripped of life. Debris, broken wood, trampled corn stalks, scattered equipment, lines the bottom of the trench. And then your eye travels upward along the ridge, and you see them, Confederate soldiers lying where they fell, heaped along the embankment in grotesque, unposed stillness. There is no heroism here, no drama, no glory, just bodies in the dirt in the September heat. On the far left, a Union soldier stands watching. He is alive. He is upright. And that contrast between the standing man and the fallen ones is perhaps the most haunting element of the entire composition. He is us. He is the witness, and he cannot look away. Gardner made this photograph just days after the battle, on September 19, 1862. The Battle of Antietam had taken place on the 17th, a single day that produced approximately 23,000 casualties. It remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. To understand why this photograph exists and why it looks the way it does, you have to understand Alexander Gardner himself. Gardner was born in 1821 in Paisley, Scotland, into a working-class family. He was, from a young age, a man of deep social conscience. As a young journalist and community organizer, he was drawn to the ideas of the utopian socialist Robert Owen, and he even helped organize a cooperative community in Iowa, a project that ultimately failed, partly due to a typhoid epidemic that devastated the settlers. By the 1850s, Gardner had emigrated to the United States and found his calling in photography. He went to work for Matthew Brady, the most famous photographer in America, and quickly proved himself to be not merely a skilled technician, but a true visual artist with an instinct for meaning. Gardner managed Brady's Washington Gallery and became the preferred photographer of Abraham Lincoln. He would go on to shoot more portraits of Lincoln than any other photographer. There's something remarkable about that connection. The man who documented the president also documented the president's war at its most unsparing. But Gardner eventually broke with Brady, in part over a critical dispute. Brady had a practice of crediting all work simply as "photo by Brady," regardless of who actually held the camera. Gardner refused to accept this erasure. When he left to establish his own studio in 1863, he was insistent that photographers receive individual credit for their work. He was, in this sense, not just an artist, but an advocate for artistic authorship. His landmark publication, Gardner's Photographic Sketchbook of the War, published in 1866, was among the first photography books ever produced in America, and it credited each image to its specific photographer by name. When Gardner's Antietam photographs went on display at Matthew Brady's New York Gallery in October 1862, the reaction was unlike anything the American public had experienced. The New York Times wrote that the photographs brought the terrible reality of war to people's doorsteps, that those who could not visit the battlefield could now, in some sense, stand upon it. People lined up on Broadway to see them, and many were shaken to their core. This was not simply because the images were graphic, though they were. It was because they were true. Painting could lie. Illustration could soften. But the photograph, in the mid-19th century imagination, was understood as a direct imprint of reality. Light had touched these bodies. The same light that entered the camera lens had bounced off these fallen men. Gardner understood this power, and he wielded it deliberately. His captions for the Antietam series were not clinical or detached. They were emotional, at times almost literary, designed to make the viewer feel the weight of individual loss within the scale of mass death. In doing so, he helped invent something we now take entirely for granted: the idea that photojournalism carries a moral responsibility, that the camera is not merely a recording device but a witness, and that the witness has an obligation to tell the truth, even when, especially when, the truth is unbearable. Gardner went on to photograph the aftermath of other Civil War battles, Lincoln's second inauguration, and, with painful historical irony, Lincoln's assassination and the execution of the conspirators. He spent his later years photographing the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad and the landscapes of the American West, always drawn to the places where history was being made and unmade. He died in 1882 in Washington, D.C., relatively unknown outside photography circles. The fame he deserved came slowly, posthumously, as it so often does for those who dedicate themselves to showing the world what it would rather not see. The photograph we've been looking at today is not comfortable. It was never meant to be. Gardner placed his camera at the edge of that sunken road and made a choice, a deliberate, artistic, moral choice, to show the world not the glory of battle, but its residue. Not the charge, but the aftermath. Not the flag raised in victory, but the bodies left behind when the flags were carried away. In doing so, he gave us something that no painting, no dispatch, no speech could provide: a moment of enforced honesty. War, this photograph says, looks like this, and 160 years later it still does.